It's interesting that it was only later on, when I started looking at information on the drugs on the internet, that I saw that the drugs could have this effect. And in fact, when we went back to the GP, because he hadn't been involved, and I think that was a mistake on our part, it would have been better to have the GP involved at the same time as a consultant psychiatrist. But he said, oh yes, fast heartbeat, rapid breathing. And he knew these side effects, but nobody had ever said that to us before.
So that must have been quite comforting just to have known that.
Yeah, he recognised that it was a symptom.
So when after a couple of times when, although Carolyn was responding brilliantly to the hypnosis, I had various concerns that it wasn't actually her thinking patterns that was actually holding this depression and this high anxiety state in place. So I talked to you, didn't I, about maybe seeing a clinical nutritionist, just to see if there was any physical, chemical imbalance there that was actually holding this illness in place. Because, I mean, I see quite a lot of anxious and depressed people, and she just didn't exhibit those normal, you know, what I would regard as normal depressive thinking styles. Very, very different. So do you just want to tell us a little bit how you followed it on then with...
Yeah, in fact, we were in two minds about this, and Carolyn, of course, didn't want to come and see you, and she didn't want to go and see the nutritionist either. And I kept saying, but it's just another tool. We've got these different things we're putting in place. We need to look for other things that can be effective. And we had been taking a multivitamin and multimineral, but the nutritionist really was in favour of much higher levels of vitamin supplements and mineral supplements. And I've seen this reported other places as well since, that when people are ill, the level of some of these vitamins, B6, B12, magnesium that people are taking are perhaps 5 or even 10 times the recommended maximum daily dose, and we were nowhere near that. So the nutritionist recommended flaxseed oil, which I mean Carolyn still takes, even though she's well, and high levels of vitamin C, and then what Carolyn calls a brew, which is a multi-mineral, multivitamin herbal brew, which we took religiously to try to get her immune system improved, to try and fight, really to get her physically in better shape. And at the same time, she recommended that we have a urine test done with a specialist laboratory who could actually analyse urine to look at neurotransmitters. So we did that, and then that threw up a whole range of new
astounding results,
information.
Wasn't it? Do you just want to describe that a bit, Malcolm, about the different levels of serotonin and the precursors and the uptakes? And just tell
yeah,
us
this is it's quite a common test used in industry called HPLC, and what it does is it creates a profile of information depending on the chemicals which are in the urine. And the trick is to learn how to match these profiles with different chemicals. And this laboratory have obviously learned how to identify serotonin, the waste products of serotonin, and the precursor to serotonin, also dopamine and noradrenaline, and also to look at other waste products which are in the urine from neurotransmitters, and to look at bacterial infection. And this was very interesting because it showed that Carolyn had a completely atypical serotonin profile. So whereas people who are normally depressed, if we can say that, have low serotonin, they also have low precursor to serotonin and low waste from serotonin. So really it's almost like the whole profile of serotonin, precursor, serotonin, waste is depressed. But for Carolyn, it was completely the opposite. She had reasonable levels of precursor, virtually zero serotonin, but then very high waste. And what was happening is that there was bacteria identified by the inflammation marker, which were attacking the serotonin. So the high levels of precursor were meaning that we were making the serotonin, but instead of the serotonin building as normal, it was actually being attacked by the bacteria. which is why we had lots of the waste products of serotonin.
So it wasn't ever getting to the right receptor sites, was it?
Well, there was just none there.
Yeah.
Basically, there was just no serotonin there. So, and the other interesting thing in this as well was that the adrenaline was high. Now that obviously, the noradrenaline being high is what you'd expect if people are anxious. So what Carolyn was taking was SSNRI, which actually had something to maintain the adrenaline levels as well. It wasn't just a straightforward SSRI. So that meant that with this venlafaxine, the adrenaline levels were being maintained, even though she actually was at high adrenaline levels. So we would have been better with a straight SSRI instead of SSNRI, if we'd have been better on any of them at all. So when I mentioned this to the consultant, he did say, well, at the lower levels, it's just like an SSRI. But I did feel as though when Carolyn was very ill and she showed high anxiety levels, that to prescribe an SSNRI at that time was inappropriate. I'm not a medic, but it seemed to me, looking back, that an SSNRI in cases where people are anxious isn't appropriate.
I think you had quite a lot of opposition to some of the things that you'd started to understand and formulated and then suggested to the consultant psychiatrist, didn't you?
Yeah, I guess opposition. He wasn't strongly opposed in that he didn't. He felt, firstly, and I'd heard this from one of the other consultant psychiatrists. They said one thing at a time. You do one thing and see if there's a change. But at the rate that they worked, then it would have taken forever to actually make progress. I'd much rather do lots of things, and if we find we get some benefit, then we can take one away and see whether that was it or not. But I wanted some action. When you've lived with deep depression for a year, really, making one change and waiting 3 months isn't good enough. So he wasn't violently opposed to some of the things, but he just wasn't supportive. I think that's the best way to describe it.